Welcome to the Africa für Allmanns podcast, another English-speaking episode. However, with a guest, my dear friend Edwin Sosthenes is back, and together we will speak about the African Union, the giant institution that hosts basically all 55 African countries. Edwin has been on the show before in season 1. He has given us deep insights on his home country of Tanzania and also neighboring Burundi. And he is, as I always like to mention, a running encyclopedia. So for sure the right guest to speak about this issue of African unity and the organization that tries to deliver it, the African Union. Edwin currently pursues his PhD and at the same time works as a teacher in Turkey, Antalya. And we decided to have a rather open conversation about the matter, given that there's quite a lot of misconceptions maybe about the AU or about the goals and obstacles that it faces, let's say. If you enjoy the conversation, there's another informal part. I give you now the first hour, but there's another informal part after we opened the first beer and the topic got a bit more interesting, let's say. So make sure to check that out. It's available on Steady and on Patreon for all our subscribers. So with a small monthly subscription, you can be part of the Africa für Allmanns supporter team and get exclusive access to a large variety of different episodes. In any case, support us, show us some love, follow us on Instagram, or give a good ranking on Apple Podcasts to improve the algorithm. And in any case, enjoy the conversation on the African Union. Let's go. Your third time now on the podcast, and we are having a big plan for today, and the plan is called African Union. Well, we could, I guess, start at many places, but maybe let's just start at the beginning, Edwin. What exactly is the African Union?
African Union is an institution which comprises, it's a continental body, which comprises of 15 member states. Mm-hmm. These member states are and only from the African continent. Yes, we have many people who have African descent from other countries. Yeah. Maybe they would want to join or whatever. But the charter or the constitution of the African Union states that the member countries should be only and only from the continent. And it was officially launched in South Africa in 2002, and it was the successor to the other organization which was there before it. That organization was called the Organization of African Unity.
OAU, right? I remember.
OAU, yes.
Okay,
yes.
But this one is still in place for quite a while. Or when would you say dates back the first appearance of this African concept?
The African Union concept? Like as a concept or as an organization?
As an organization. Let's maybe keep it there because otherwise I get it goes.
Yes, it goes way back in time. Okay, as an organization, African Union began in 2002, but the successor now, the one which was succeeded, the organization which was succeeded, the Organization of African Union, began 1963, and it went until 1999, somewhere 2002. After, when you create an organization, one to be replaced by the other, it takes some time, some processes, some whatever to be replaced fully. So the underlying framework and to create the African Union started in 1999, but the African Union was fully launched in 2002.
Okay, interesting. So then I guess I understand better the naming here. So then maybe let's go to the very early times, 1963. If that's the first organization, in this case of African Union or African Unity, what was this time? When did it come to rise? What was maybe also the historical background for this organization?
Historical background. Thank you. African continent, let me try to divide it as we had some Spanish, or before that, the German colonies, and but after the Second World War, African Union was dominantly under the sphere of British and the French. Yes, we do have Mozambique and Angola and Guinea, Bissau, which was governed by the Portuguese, and some Equatorial Guinea, Western Sahara, which was governed by the Spanish. But the area of influence is quite minute compared to what the French called the French West Africa, or the British who ruled from Egypt, Sudan, way down to South Africa.
Continuously. So it's crazy.
Yes. It was quite crazy. Now, many of the French countries got their independence. The French, I don't mean French countries. Okay, the French colonized countries got their independence from beginning 1960 way to 1960 something. So 1960s, let's put like that. And most of the British countries also got their independence during that time. Obviously, you have the exception of South Africa, Namibia, and a few other countries which got their independence later than 1963. So in 1963, May, the 32 countries which were independent by that time, you'd have a bit of, Tanzania, Ghana,
those are the big founders, right? I mean, in terms of...
Yes. Ethiopia, which was never ruled. So they met in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to sign the charter for creating the first Africa post-independent continental institution. Yes.
That was basically to replace the, let's say, larger framework of the colonial powers that they used to have and do it themselves, or what was the spirit then?
The spirit came from Pan-Africanism. And obviously, that Pan-Africanism is quite a larger topic.
I think we will for sure get there at some point, but I guess it deserves an extra episode, right?
Yes, it deserves its own episode. I'll be glad if I'll be welcome to be the guest, or
always,
we share knowledge. Maybe somebody else can come and proceed with it. But, the spirit which was born out of Pan-Africanism, starting from William Du Bois in America, and then later the Pan-African Congress, which was called in London, and because most of the people, or most of the students, the scholars who went to study in Europe, you would also have somebody like Leopold Senghor, the first president of Senegal.
Okay.
They influenced a lot this Pan-Africanism, and colonialism had its worst sides. Really, the effects were bitter. Very difficult to handle. But at least, with the happening of the Second World War, and later the Africans are getting to know their rights, and some of them going to Europe to study. The way you'd have the Renaissance in Europe after them being introduced to the Middle Eastern progress.
Yes.
So that was like the Renaissance of Africa. People coming with new ideas and creating this sense of brotherhood. And after
Africans who basically went to the colonial European countries to study, and then they came back with new ideas.
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. They didn't bring everything new because there was a certain framework. There are some people who were there, but they just galvanized and making these people more united, amalgamated, in order to have the same cause, which was achieving the independence. Okay, now, after achieving the independence, you're independent countries. So what? What next? So this African Union was born out of that.
So basically the people were realizing their common identity when they were in the diaspora, and maybe saw also the possibility of big organizations. But I mean, I guess it must have been quite difficult if I think about now already in the present day, a lot of African countries, I guess, due to their colonial border construction, other things, they sometimes struggle with this concept of nation states. So
Sure.
was it already back then a bit more difficult, or how was maybe the stability of the founding members of the African Union? Were they able to integrate already, or were they still busy with their own independence?
Those countries which formed the Organization of African Union were not very much fully because, for you to have this concept of nation fused into a group, maybe let me go to a country like Congo, where you have more than 500 tribes, or Cameroon, Nigeria, which we have some kind more than 300 plus 400 tribes. Tribes, when I mean tribes, ethnic groups, because they stand on their own, they have their own culture and whatever. Fusing them into one nation in a period of 1 or 2 years, it's something which is
super ambitious,
quite impossible. Yes, you'd have countries like where you have the similar people, like Somalia, perhaps Rwanda or Burundi by then. Not the one after genocide or whatever, by then. Maybe I would say that could be very practical to fuse the ideas of the single country, the nation. But in other countries, there are many numerous states which were supposed to be realized, like creating the same or lingua franca, and trying to eliminate this form of tribalism, which currently I have to acknowledge that is still a huge problem in Africa. So these countries were not very stable in terms of having this harmony as nations, but the leaders had somewhere to start from. In order for you to have a strong house or building, you should have a strong foundation. So they were still trying to create a stronger foundation, and then later try to build a building on it, even though time was not on their side to wait that everything should stabilize and then later you continue. No. It was due to the circumstances which happened by that time. I guess what they aspired is, having a place or a common body which could provide for their freedom, equality, justice, and the African dignity. I think I talked to you sometime after the certain debates I saw. I told you about the way it was very easy to speak the word Negro in 1960s, but now it's quite different. So maybe they thought the African dignity lacked, and in order to bridge in that gap, so the forming of African Union and a stronger institution for the African identity, despite Africans being black or white, and a bit yellow from the north, like the Arabs and whatever, but having this African identity, Africa could be powerful more than being individual countries.
And I guess this was not having a negative connotation, right? Because the nation states were basically given to them more or less by the colonial powers, and this African Union, I guess, is intrinsic more or less, right?
Absolutely. You went to Namibia, I think.
Yes.
You saw certain tribes which could be Namibia and Angola. They're just on different sides of the border. Or the Maasai in Tanzania and Kenya, the Lango, the Luha in Uganda and Kenya. You have certain tribes in Nigeria and Cameroon, certain tribes in southern Libya and in northern Chad, Egypt. So these were just the structures, the lines drawn by the colonialists based on maybe rivers, mountains. They didn't care about the societies which are within. So the Africans, they just have this drive to embrace the African culture, the common heritage. And also remember that by that time we had apartheid in South Africa. Not only South Africa, even in Zimbabwe. Later it came under Ian Smith, Rhodesia.
Yeah.
So this was all to fight against those and promote the unity, the solidarity, and as young nations, they needed each other.
Definitely.
In order to achieve that. And primarily, even though many or few scholars could acknowledge this, but somehow, after researching on my own, and I also came to my own senses, like the vision was also having the United States of Africa, like the way you have the United States of America.
Yes. Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, both are continental projects, more or less. True. To some extent, this was also the idea in Europe. I mean, they were also aiming at this concept of Europe at some point. But I think, yes, very well. We have now some idea of how the time was, and also how the member states were probably thinking about it. And maybe now let's look a bit into the concrete institution. What was then maybe the first policy goals, or the first founding ideas of the African Union? Did they already lay out something formally, or was it more a loose connection of countries?
At the beginning, it was the very loose connection of countries, but over time, they developed certain policy goals, which included making sure that the whole African continent is liberated from the colonialism.
That's the main idea, to counter.
That was, yes.
So then I can assume that, for example, apartheid states like the ones you just mentioned were not members at that point.
They were not members.
They were not members. Okay.
They were not members at that.
So all free African states were only allowed.
Only free African. Yeah, because African Union it was formed in 1963. Zambia got its independence in 1964. It was not independent. Zambia going down. If you have the African continent map, maybe later
yes, we will put it into the podcast photo, so they will see.
Yes, on the broadcast photo it is there. So Zambia going down, it was not independent. And when you say Zambia going down, it's like almost 2/5 of the continent.
Wow, yeah, so true. This southern African area, SADC, basically nowadays, right?
Yes, SADC, with the exception of Tanzania. All of it was not independent.
Okay, and over time then, one by one, as they became independent,
over time, one by one,
they would join then automatically the African.
Absolutely. But Zambia, the best thing because I mentioned Zambia, let me be biased a bit to Zambia. They didn't achieve their independence by war. They talked, obviously, you have a bit of bloodshed, but it was not like a struggle like the way it happened in other countries. They achieved their independence by peace. So we talked about trying to achieve the peace, the continental freedom. So I'll be biased a bit to Tanzania. Tanzania was selected because strategically of its position. It was bordering these countries, like to be the chair of this committee to make these African countries independent. Yeah. Obviously, support in terms of finance, ammunition came from other African countries. But when you're the front line, the chairperson, you have to give a lot compared to the others.
True.
So the headquarters were in Dar es Salaam, and you have many revolutionaries. Like
the African Union headquarters was in Dar es Salaam.
Not Pan-African Union. No. I mean the Committee for the Liberation of
okay. So the movement to liberate other African states. I see.
Yes, it was in Dar es Salaam. You even had Castro, Che Guevara, and others meeting. Che Guevara even moved from Dar es Salaam to Congo.
Wow.
Via that, in order to achieve a bit of by that time you have
similar to Algiers, maybe Algiers with Ben Bella also hosting many revolutionaries, and so those cities, let's say those revolutionary ideas were pushing also indirectly the African Union then, right? Because if these revolutions succeeded, African Union would grow, having more independent African countries. So you could say then, given the fact that now all African countries are free, the core idea of the African Union has already been fulfilled.
Yes, one among the core ideas of African Union has been fulfilled, even though we still have the same problems. Problems are always exist. Many African countries, they just have the flag independent.
True. But maybe just to go a bit through those years from the 60s to maybe the present day, were there any big, agreements or big deals or programs that were established on the way that you could see maybe as anchor points for the development of the OAU at that time?
They were, the leadership fatigue kicked in especially after the first 10 years of African countries getting independent. So it became like the OAU became like a clubhouse where the African leaders would just meet to have their own annual talks, what's going there and whatever. By saying this, I don't really undermine the achievements which they achieved. No, it's like it became like a routine, discussing things, discussing that.
It could have been also a summit. It's basically like a summit.
In the summit.
Okay, it was not like an organization that we will see maybe today, where they have institutions.
Yes, it was not that. And there are some people even started to decry this and calling for reformations. And one among the reformations also of AU came to be the AU came out of OAU as the result of these reformations, and also the hidden reformations which are continuing to take place within the AU itself. Because, the way you have the mosquito or the butterfly, the larva, and then after some time, you have the metamorphosis in biology, or the way the snake sheds skin for its growth and, sometimes these things are quite important. Yes.
So this is the game changer, basically the change from OAU to AU, where everything becomes institutionalized, more or less.
Yes. Okay. Many things became institutionalized. But on that point, I want to say also, one among the main aims of having OAU is having a common voice as Africa, as a continent. Because, unfortunately, I'm still very disappointed. To date, many countries, maybe because Africa, we don't know like our worth or our voice, our power. You would have this China meeting with Africa, Australia with Africa, German with Africa. You combine these 55 countries as if it's like,
Absolutely.
This thing started then. And yes, we are trying to have this common voice, but I think this is one among the things which we have not succeeded as such. But there's certain progress. I can't undermine the progress which we have made, and over time, colonialism was eradicated. After some time, when you had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, so also this was adopted to the African countries, and with this being the case now, there are certain countries which called upon establishing righted ones, like we are going to have the organization, we're going to have the United States of Africa. Now, there are the other side, normally you'd have a coin which has two opposite sides, the head and the tail. Yes. This is the part of natural selection. It's like
absolutely
always people would have different ideas. But there are certain countries, as I said, they called upon having the one African country.
Yeah.
And the other say, no, this is quite impossible. Let's try to find the commonalities we have between amongst us. Maybe the northern ones, the western ones, the eastern ones, the central ones, the southern ones. Thereafter, over time, let's create the regional economic organizations. When these regional economic organizations strengthen up, we are going to unite them. It might be quite easier.
Okay. Like ECAS, ECOWAS, etc. They were maybe planned as a first step towards African Union.
Absolutely.
And now those two things are parallel more.
Yes.
Interesting.
They were planned towards, let me correct you, African Union, but in terms of United States of Africa.
Okay. Or not as the integration process. The question is,
yes, the integration.
First integrate all together, or do you start with small blocks and then fusion those blocks at the end, right? But those regional blocks, they came after the OAU, right? So
they came after the OAU.
Could you say that there was maybe like a conflict of ideas, asking whether it makes sense maybe to have small unions instead of keeping the big one, or was there always this idea of having the large African Union?
I would even like to acknowledge this fact. Most of the first African leaders were not only leaders, but they were educated.
Okay.
Like They had like Leopold Senghor of Senegal, Senghor.
Yeah.
He even taught the French people French in
Wow.
France.
Okay. Not bad.
There's certain histories when you read, you're like, you're surprised, So they were intellectual. And obviously, I'm sure, yes, okay, it was a club where people just meet the leaders, but I'm sure they had certain intellectual discussions with which many ideas could be brought together, like a conference of scientists as such, just things like that. You bring out theories. What if we do this? That will happen, this and that, So these intellectuals had different ideas. But now, into amalgamating these ideas, two big ideas which rose are these ones. And every side was advocating for its own position. Like, as I stated already, for the regional economic organization, it would be easier to integrate them later after finding the certain commonalities within. Because yes, Africa is one, but you have this small or little difference which make people, whether if they want to be different or whether they don't want to be different, but the certain differences exist, and these differences form a certain pluralism, which is good, the colorful world, the colorful Africa, that's it. But now the ones who advocated for having one Africa, they advocated that because they stated that it will be easier to unite Africa by then.
Okay. At once.
When you have young countries compared to over time, when these ideas of nationalism, countries has kicked into the blood, and the veins of people, and it's circulating, they even advocated saying like, okay, we have these tribes, they just on the different side of the border, but maybe when a war would happen, they could be the same ethnic group, but because they are from different countries, they can fight against each other.
But that's the exact concept of national identity, right? Nationalism becoming higher in the, let's say, ranking than tribal identity. So by that logic, is it then maybe also now a problem that the African Union has been there so long, but during that time also all these people were born, all these young people have risen to nation states, and maybe now a person from, I don't know, Nigeria finds himself first a Nigerian. Back to 50 years ago, maybe he was first an African instead of a Nigerian. Is that also a conflict that the integration process maybe has to face?
Yes, this is the big conflict. And not only that, I have to be biased on this side. Okay, I'm trying to give examples from many parts of Africa.
Yeah.
Okay, I've not talked much about Northern Africa, but I'll talk about it later when the right examples come. Let's start, for example, with a country like Uganda. Uganda, its name comes from the Baganda, who, according to the latest statistic, they are like comprising something like 40% of the Ugandan population, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so it's
40%.
Majority.
So the country's name comes from them.
Yeah.
So there are some friends of mine, close friends I met, they told me like, okay, I'm Ugandan, but I'm first royal to my king, then to my country.
So the tribal identity is higher than the national one still. Okay.
Yes. The same applies to the Zulu in South Africa, who comprise something like 12%. We have also a mutual friend who is Zulu.
Let's hope you also listen.
Yes, the same thing. Okay, yes, it was very difficult to establish this nationalism. Now, the nationalism thing has kicked in. You also have the second layer of conflict. There are certain people who are royal to their ethnic tribes, ethnic groups, then the country. So you have double conflicts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when it comes to nationalism, I think the ones who advocated for having a united Africa at one instant, they are right. But when it comes to the practicality of making this African United States of Africa work, I think the second group who advocated for regionalism, first like regional economic organization, then later uniting them together, they're correct. You can be correct all time, but at a certain point of time, and using various parameters, we can try to see which idea outweighs the other when you compare it, over different parameters.
True. Interesting. So it's maybe, it seems to be even more complicated than in Europe, because you basically then have 4 layers of identity. You have your tribal one, you have your national, then the regional, like, I don't know, West African, East African, and then even the African, so continental. This is very complicated.
Yes.
So it makes it, I guess, hard then for the African Union as the most outside layer to act at any sort. I think, let's keep that in mind for a second when we turn now maybe also to the achievements that the African Union for sure had, aside of the liberation process. I mean, we must acknowledge that there were also many conflicts during those years, 1960, 2020, some of which came, I guess, from the outside, Cold War, etc., but some internally. Did the African Union also act maybe as some sort of a peacemaker or negotiator?
Sure.
Is this part also of the history of the African Union?
Absolutely. Beginning from the Organization of African Unity, then coming later to the AU, African Union has been the cornerstone of making sure that peace and stability is happening in Africa. Yes, we won't say that it 100% succeeded into making this thing happening. No, but they tried their best. And, we also have the other problem, funding.
Yes.
Yes, because some African countries cannot even fund their own budget. Now, when it comes to AU, the main funding processes of these organizations is the country's own contribution to the fund. And then later you have you also have donors, you don't have grants coming from other external sources. So it has been quite a problem. But you had Somalia, which was a very stable country. Many people, especially our current generation, will tell you the current Somalia. But Somalia used to be a stable country. It would even contribute to peace, keeping peace in other countries. But after 1990s, what happened? It's quite I'm sorry for that. But the one among the biggest African Union mission to keep peace in Africa was the AMISOM. It's called the African Mission to Somalia. Yes, AMISOM, African Mission to Somalia. It intends to keep peace there. You have combatants from Uganda, Burundi, a bit of Kenya, who form the majority over there. You also have the African Union mission to recently this Central African Republic.
The current difficulties there. After
the eruption of the violence, they're there. You also have the African Union mission to Congo, Tanzania, and other countries, apart from the UN mission. UN mission is there in Congo, but the African mission is also there. So they have been trying to keep peace and stability. You have these countries, unfortunately, as you stated, certain conflicts could be from internal causes, but certain conflicts could be coming from the external causes. Like in Congo, I don't have even to speak about it. So you have this fragile peace existing. You have rebels who are quite powerful, or terrorist groups like Al-Shabaab, which are quite powerful, and the government is very fragile. So in order to keep that peace between them, you should have a middle man, like a broker. So AU doesn't negotiate with terrorists, as American stated by itself, but they just try to keep sure that peace is there and stability. They try to stand for the elected government or the interim government before the country comes to take its own or to assume its own responsibilities and its own sovereign and governing process. So.
Okay. But how does that work? I mean, without getting too much into the nerd facts, maybe, but do they have some sort of a committee, or is there some sort of a parliament that then decides? What is maybe also the institutional framework that the African Union can use in cases, for example, of conflict?
In terms of conflict, okay.
maybe in general, I mean, if there's also some law or a court, or I'm not sure, is there any form of a mechanism also then to prosecute, for example, certain actors, or what's...
The way you have the European Court of Justice, we also have the African Court of Justice.
Okay.
It is there. The African Court of Appeal. You also have the African Parliament. You have the African Development Bank. These institutions, which exist in everywhere, maybe people may not have heard of them, but they exist. The implementation of these stuffs could be different, or the extent to which this program covers the whole Africa, like the way people have anticipated, could be different, but programs are there. There are some of these programs which were started by the OAU itself. Yes. For example, there was a plan to eradicate poverty in the 1980s, and after the conflict, or after the fall of socialism, many African countries were non-aligned, even though they were quite leaning socialists, but they were non-aligned. So after the fall of socialism, in particular the USSR, impacted them a lot in terms of the economy and the elections and stuff. Yeah. So we had a kind of recession or recovery and whatever in Africa by then. We had this NEPAD, which was, it aimed at improving the African economies, which were struggling in the 1980s. This is a series of events. It came after the Arab-Israeli war, and then later you had the oil crisis in 1973. Yeah. And then over time, it created, many African countries from that time until now. We export goods or raw materials which are not added value. So it's not you who detects the price at the market, it's the buyer who does it. And who are the buyers? Obviously, the Western industrialized countries. True. So we were receiving prices which were not favorable to our economy. So over time, we had lots of debt. And then this debt caused to our economies to collapse. Like, let me tell you, for example, I'm also being biased to Tanzania. Coming to 1980s, the rate of the exchange of $1 used to be 12, is it 10 or 12? 1985, 10 or 12 Tanzanian shilling to $1. But should I tell you what's the rate now?
Tell me.
2,200.
So a factor of 200. Wow.
Devaluation of your money, in order to get certain loans from IMF to restructure. Yes, this is one among the things which the African Union, we didn't succeed. If we could be having our own powerful banks, we could be learning within each other, And, sometimes it could be very easy for a person in Nigeria to import something from China compared from that person to import something from Uganda.
I guess that's also a big part. That was going to be my next question, because the infrastructure, I guess, is in the end what brings unity, right? In Europe, it's easy to say we have the Schengen, we have connected streets almost anywhere, and train routes. So it's probably very easy to also experience that union to some extent. But is there also this initiative, or is there even the capacities for these kind of initiatives to connect African countries? Is there some way, except maybe for those summits, to connect these?
Yes, initiatives are there, and as I've spoken, but Africa, it's more than 30 million square kilometers.
Yeah, that's true. That's
in Africa, unfortunately, we have unforgiving geography.
Absolutely.
We have the Cairo to Cape Town road. You have heard of that, right?
Yes.
Yes, but that road, it was not like an African Union funded as per se. African Union funded parts of the road, but the parts of the roads, not the wall. It was individual countries were funding construction. Yeah. But it's complete I'm sure, I think certain parts are not complete, but now it is a possibility, I think, to drive from Cairo to Cape Town.
Wow.
There are certain areas which are not asphalted or tarmac roads, but it's navigable. Yeah, you can navigate from Cairo to whatever to. And we had the other one I don't remember, was it coming from Lagos or Dakar, coming down to, was it Nairobi or somewhere? I don't remember such. But we have the Congo forest.
Yeah.
So it's huge, it's dense.
Indeed.
And some areas, they're not even navigable. They don't have even this infrastructure, roads.
Yeah.
So they are only connected by the river. So obviously, when you group Africa in terms of north, southern, east, and west, I would say west, not all of the west, but west going to down Atlantic Ocean. It's quite dense forest coming to Congo. Mm-hmm. So it's quite difficult to link the Western Africa and other places of Africa.
Yeah.
And it's even more difficult to link Central Africa with other places of Africa.
Even with Northern Africa, if you take the Sahara.
Absolutely. Even North Africa, you have this geography.
So I agree. Every form of, let's say, infrastructural connection is extremely intense in terms of the effort.
That's why I say, like, there's, in Europe, like, you have maybe ice tundra in the Arctic or Norway, it's quite far. Okay, you have maybe mountains in Switzerland, but you can dig tunnels because of the advancement of technology and funding. But at least, Europe being this small, like 6 million square kilometers, right? Compared to 30.
Most of it is Russia.
5 times.
Most of it is Russia, but you're right.
And most of it is Russia, this European part of Russia, the Ural Mountains.
Yes.
So,
and, even our mountains are now compared to Kilimanjaro. So, it's the extent of the geography.
Yeah.
And you're right. Also, our rigid coast, the coastline makes it so connected because all parts can directly go through the Mediterranean or through the North Sea exchange. This is not the case.
Sure, but this should not be the
Of course.
We are blessed with human resources who could think outside the box. Maybe I think on the other side, we have not thought very much the African way to solve the African problems. Many African leaders would only say African solutions for African problems when they stretch to their power. But not thinking outside the box to counter the problems, the core problems which face the normal African citizen on the ground.
But then maybe something that can be done also regardless of things like infrastructure. What about open borders? What about the connectivity? Is the African Union also proposing some sort of a Schengen room maybe or something like that?
Yes, we are heading there. And by the way, I would even tell you there are certain African countries with which are practiced. Yes, signing the African United States of Africa did not work out. And the second idea prevailed when people stated, like, let's form this regional organization, and then after time we are going to unite them. Now a person from the East African community could travel within 6 countries, which are Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi, with only a passport. You don't need a visa. You don't need visa to go in those countries.
There's the EAC passport now, basically.
EAC part. And luckily, sorry, I'm being biased from the Tanzanian because I'm also Tanzanian, and Tanzania happens to be in
you guys
EAC,
have a lot of regional
and
groups,
also
so
SADC. Yes. So in terms of SADC, I can go to South Africa, Namibia, Botswana without a need of passport and stay there up to 6 months, 3 months, I don't remember, provided I just have the right document, which is my passport. It is very possible. So we have a certain form of Schengen. It's not practical. It's not that much compared to Schengen in terms of coverage or in terms of being able to work freely and whatever. But it's something for the start. Yeah, it's a good thing. Even in Western Africa also, ECOWAS. You also have that.
True.
But, it could even be, I went to Nigeria some way back in 2013, but the trouble I got at getting the visa, the flights, oh my God. I can't explain. And, the infrastructure we talked about,
Yeah.
In order to go to Nigeria, the common air flight you use it, Kenyan Airways or Ethiopian. So when you say Kenyan Airways, you should connect to Nairobi and then later you go to Nigeria. Or you should connect to Addis Ababa and then later you go to Nigeria.
No,
you don't have this
there's no
common
direct flights.
direct flights. No.
No.
It's and this is killing trade, is killing investment.
And this is also killing the price then, right? If there's no
prices,
competitors, how can you afford these kind of flights, right? It's probably very expensive.
Sure. But I don't say that we don't have African investors who are willing to do this, but I would say sometimes, bureaucracy was brought to simplify and ease things, but as the case in Europe and other places, nowadays bureaucracy is bringing the red tapes and problems. Is creating more problems. Now, when you bring it to the African context, I would say that times 3. The red tapes and all the processes.
Yeah.
And
I guess also with things like the climate change topic, we shall never forget that having a cheap and affordable flight network would, for example, in Africa, bring much more goods than bads, despite of any carbon footprint. Because I guess in many cases, the flight is the only alternative of transportation, right? There's no other way to African countries.
Sure.
It's important. So there's some sort of African passport, I hear from you. It's
Yes. We have the Vision 2063, where the African Union envisioned to establish the common passport, which I think is it my child? The child of my child, my grandchild, who is going
one of them for sure.
So they say like Africa needs urgent and necessary growth, and this growth should be reflective to the African countries, and they should grow as one, not one country becoming a giant like the way you have Nigeria now or South Africa, and then other ones becoming smaller, like the way you have maybe Gambia or Lesotho. By saying that, I don't mean to undermine countries, but I mean like, having a sustainable growth, because growth is being brought by the population and the skills, the knowledge, the human resources, the economy, the investment. It's a lot of factors, but having this sustainable growth, which is quite important. And this growth economically should go with development, and it should be inclusive.
True.
Inclusive. So after creating this, we envision to have a common passport, but the problem, one among the problems of the former AU and the former OAU is that we had many priority areas to focus at the continental level. So they envisioned to minimize, to reduce this number, and making these areas more feasible.
Okay, can you give an example maybe? Like an example for these areas, just to understand it better.
The infrastructure.
Okay.
But now creating the infrastructure could be more benefit, like establishing more Cairo to Cape Town.
Okay, you mean they prioritized other things?
Yes.
Okay.
Every country has its own priorities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Prioritizing things as a continent, or maybe creating a flag carrier for Africa.
Yeah.
And connecting now these African citizens, by establishing by giving this African passport. Later, you're going to have the African citizen, where a citizen of Africa, of any country, any descent, could work, live, stay in other countries without any disturbance, like the way you do in EU.
True. Interesting. So there is a clear vision. 2063.
There is a vision.
Have that passport to any African citizen, and basically then form identity on paper. Huh?
Absolutely. Now, there is something which we were about to talk, but maybe we might have forgotten.
Yeah.
When we started saying like, yes. Now, the Agenda 2063 also, okay, I'll come to that point later.
No stress.
The Agenda 23 also tried to put benchmarks.
Okay.
Yes, a period with which these implementation, the plans would be implemented, and also try to measure where we are and where did we want to achieve. Are we on the same track? When are we going to work it out? And they say like they will be having a 10-year gap of making sure that until 2063, all the agreed points, all the outcomes are realized.
Yeah. So it's more or less project management
mm-hmm.
of the vision, that they keep checks every frequent.
Because like before, okay, benchmarks were there, but the follow-up was not very much. And this thing is dubbed, or it's called the Africa we want.
Africa we want. That's the agenda.
Yes,
okay.
The agenda, the Africa we want.
Mm-hmm.
And, the Africa is the global powerhouse for the future. Sure. I don't like to call the future as such. I would say the present.
I mean, if only then demographically, at least, for sure. I mean,
thank you. In terms of demographics,
absolutely.
And the youth, many countries in Africa would have more than half of the population are under 17.
Yeah, I think median age 19 in Africa. It's crazy.
So you must ensure that you give these people employment, because these people are going to have families to feed. Yeah. They're going to have, they want sustainable growth. So how do you do that? You should try to be inclusive and making sure that society, the development, the integration, the governance, the peace, security, and repositioning Africa now from I call it a sleeping giant, to a dominant player in the global arena.
And that is part of the Vision 2060.
That's the part of the vision. You have many committees which are focusing on making this function, obviously, but it's working very well. The technical committees, the African Commission, the Parliament, the Commission, the Peace, all of them are working hand in hand into making sure that these visions are. Yes, there were other countries. Now let me go to there were other countries which tried to apply. For example, Haiti.
Interesting. Haiti.
Yes.
But that's it's in Caribbean, right?
Yes, it was rejected because the charter. Obviously, African Union would have loved to expand. Because I think after the UN, it's the second or the third, if not the fourth, organization which has more members compared to other organizations. After UN, and then you have the Islamic organization, which has 57, and their members, something like 50. African Union 55, number 3 or number 4, somewhere there.
Okay.
It ranks in terms of coverage. Obviously, to add Haiti and other African decent countries, when you go to Papua New Guinea, not because of the color, this African ancestry, and promoting it to citizenry,
Yeah.
We should think beyond these colors. So unfortunately, the charter doesn't allow that, the African Union Charter, and Haiti was rejected, but it was given the observer member status, the way the USA, the EU, Turkey, and these other countries have the observer status. African Union.
Okay, but the idea was that basically the diaspora of Africans who were put there by, I don't know, slavery to some extent.
Absolutely.
They also wanted to be part of it. I mean, it's understandable, but I guess geographically quite difficult if you want to integrate Haiti. Yeah? It's probably...
Yes, it's like the way Morocco wanted to be the part of EU, and you know the story.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But we also didn't speak about, there's a certain time with which Morocco was ejected because of the Western Sahara issue. Okay, it might need another episode.
I think I spoke about it a bit in the first season, because people asked me, Fred, why do you say Africa für Allmann's 55 countries? And I always went by the African Union definition, because most of the organizations like EU or UN do not recognize the Western Sahara. But I think the African Union, from very early on, has been active on integrating also these more disputed areas, and I guess taking a stand for oppressed minorities. I mean, that's an important point.
Yes, right? It's an important thing because, where Morocco demands, say, like Western Sahara is a part of the former great Moroccan kingdom, but it was not there until when the Spanish moved out of Western Sahara, and they organized the Great March, with which more than, is it close to 1 million ethnic Moroccans went to Western Sahara.
Yeah.
And basically, some scholars call it like the occupation, the way Palestinians are being occupied by Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Some people say that, and some people even comment further saying, Western Sahara is very rich in phosphate.
Okay.
And phosphates is one among the important raw material. And there are some scholars even say like there are secret agreements between the US and other countries with Morocco basing on that. So if the supply is kept, these are just hearsay. I'm not sure.
I mean, but there's always certain interest in that.
If supplies are kept flowing, then the Western Sahara issue is not going to arise at the UN or wherever.
But the African Union, at least, is not biased in this case. They are taking it as it is. And maybe something that is also an important fact of the European Union. I'm sorry if I always keep...
No problem.
That as a benchmark, but protecting minorities, right? Because in many cases, if you have countries in your continent like Nigeria or South Africa, or even to some extent the Congo, if it would be stable, they will dominate all other minor countries, right? So I guess a big importance or a big benefiter of these continental unions are also the small states who have more power and more speaking rights there, right?
Sure. They should have a better a better voice.
Yeah.
Like when you talked about, you reminded me of Rwanda. Rwanda now is becoming one among the biggest players in terms of technology, internet, and being small. Sometimes I do have short friends of mine. I just joke around. Okay, being short doesn't mean like you're short in terms of attitude or power or progress. Even though sometimes these limits, because you view yourself from the looks, they could deceive you.
True.
But from what you have, you can work out like Singapore. It's
Absolutely.
a small country, city-state. But it's powerful economically. So Rwanda also is trying to create something which move from the shadows of all the auspices which affected it in 25 years ago. And
definitely
not well. But you also have the backlash. I wanted to tell you something. There are certain countries, after realizing that we are not going to achieve the United Africa, they went to unite their own country. You have, I say that I will talk about North Africa later.
Yeah.
Now, you have the union of Egypt, Egypt and Syria, the United Arab Republic.
True. For some time, they were connected, right? With
yes, it was also a backlash.
Was it with Nasser?
Nasser, and I don't remember, was it Assad or the father, Hafiz? I don't remember well.
Interesting.
Yes.
And this was, this was a reaction to the missing unity of Africa?
Yes, some scholars define it that way. And I sometimes, in one way or another, I happen to agree that. And maybe it could be a way of showing other countries that we can unite. Like Senegal also united with Gambia. Senegambia. It lasted for like 10 years, and then later they separated. But we have a very beautiful.
I understand.
We have this very beautiful example. Sorry, I have to be biased again to Tanzania, which we united in those times. 1964 until now, we're still united. Yes, we have our ups and downs, problems here and there. But
to the ones, if you don't know the story, I also recommend you, of course, the podcast with Edwin on exclusively Tanzania. I think we have a good 2 hours there. If you want to learn more about this union of Tanganyika and Zanzibar, formerly known, then that is the place to go. Maybe just because oftentimes we try to emphasize also on the nation countries of Africa. Could you give us a few, let's say, powerhouses of this process, of this African Union, which are maybe in the past and in the present the most active promoter, or maybe they are hosting the most summits, or they're hosting the most organizations of the African Union? Where would you go in Africa if you want to push forward the idea of African?
Let me start first with Ethiopia.
Wow.
Addis Ababa, because it's the capital.
It's the capital
Yes, it's the capital of Africa even.
of Africa. Interesting.
Yes, capital of AU and the first capital of OAU, AU, almost not everything, later this decentralization of African Commission, African Court of Justice were split to other cities across Africa.
Mm-hmm.
But the African Union Commission and most important organization are headquartered in Addis Ababa.
Yeah.
Be it to its history, Ethiopia part or partially was not ruled by any country, so it had this, the blessings, or I could rather say like kind of like foundation of showing this Africa. Yeah. It's free, so it had that. And post-apartheid South Africa, be it because of its economy and in terms of also contributions to the AU, it is one among the countries which contribute a lot in terms of peace, keeping peace, stability, finances, supporting programs, and I would even talk about Nigeria, because also of its economy and the way its diaspora is spread across the world, in fact also in Africa, and they're trying to push the agenda. I would even speak about Ghana. Especially their founding father, Kwame Nkrumah.
Yeah.
He pushed a lot about the idea of solidarity across Africa.
Yeah.
Even though he was prematurely overthrown from power, but Ghana has this special place in many African countries because it was the first African country under the Sahara to achieve its independence in 1958.
They were the first.
South of Sahara. You have Egypt, Morocco, Sudan achieving the independence way before 1958. But Ghana is south of Sahara, the first one. So that has also a different or a special place into African continent, or the hearts of the African people as such.
Yeah.
And Kenya to some extent, not that much, but to some extent. And I'm not going to be biased to my country.
But come on,
yes, we had the role, but the role was mostly predominantly into achieving the independence of these other countries. Yeah, okay. But these are the 3 or 4 powerful of the powerhouses that's here in the African agenda. But I wanted to remind you of one more thing when we talk about Gaddafi. Mm-hmm. We didn't talk about. True. Also, he spearheaded a lot African Union. He even sought, or he proposed the idea of establishing the currency, the common currency.
Yeah. Golden dinar, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I remember.
And some speculators or some historians or some scholars even state that could be one among them. The uprising came.
So, Edwin, how would you then maybe describe the foreign interference with the African Union? Is it the case that, as with many African countries, there's a lot of influence by, let's say, United States, EU, African Union, China, or what is the situation there in terms of the institution of the African?
I won't. Yes, it depends on how you classify it. You can say there are some people who call it as interference. Some people call it as partnership. But any partnership has prices, the price to pay, because the partnership, yes, it's a win-win. Normally, a partnership is a win-win, but it depends from which position are you negotiating from, or from which position are you going to benefit, or who benefits more than the other. Mm-hmm. So, in terms of this, yes, there's huge interference. I would say there's huge interference of these foreign countries to the AU, even though the AU would try to play down the extent of these interventions. How? We see that these countries are treated as observers, observer members to AU. But most of the African countries are not observer members to those foreign countries or those foreign organizations which observe us,
Okay,
so there's no this
reciprocal. It's a one-side relationship. It's
a one-side relationship. Yeah. And, we still have the challenge of financing the budgets of AU to a larger extent. You even find the EU, US, and the so-called donor countries financing the African projects realized by the EU. So is there impartiality on that thing? That can be a matter of question. And you can question yourself, like, if a donor funds a certain project, he or she expect the outcome to favor his or her position in some way or the other, in the long term or the short term.
Definitely.
That's also a point of discussion. So in this aspect, I'll say the interference exists, and it depends from which side are you looking at: partnership versus benefits, cost benefits analysis, and this is in regards to the EU or US funding Africa. For example, there are many scholarships which AU is providing using its own funds, but certain scholarships in partnership with individual countries. It can be Germany, Britain, and whatsoever. There is this AU-German partnership to increase the number of intellectuals in Africa. It's existing throughout. Tanzania has few universities, Cameroon, Nigeria, South Africa. And it's even under the DAD.
Yeah.
It's even under the DAD. The Germans support that.
DAAD.
DAAD.
Nice.
Yes. Deutsche Academic Exchange, but I forgot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Anyway, in terms of doing, first of all, it builds capacity to the African universities to produce intellects. And also it tries to, there's this anti-migration rhetoric coming from these European countries. So it helps to calm that down, because after some time, certain Africans, after studying, they decide to be the part of diaspora in those countries. So it helps to minimize that rhetoric. Like, if you study in your own environment, know your challenges, and you live there, you become a part of the solution to your own problems. That's nice. But there's a backlash in a different way, because the funding has to bring certain outcomes which would favor the funder, not the core aims of the African Union. After saying that, let me go to these other countries. For example, Turkey is also an observer country. Yes, Turkey says that it achieves win-win. It tries to achieve the win-win situation. That could also be put in question to what extent, even though they promote this rhetoric that everything is a win-win. Let's go to China, for example. China has constructed like several buildings and then given them to African Union as a gift. That also could be put into question. What are they getting into return? Do we know? No.
Yeah. Is there some cyber listener or whatever? Yeah.
Yes, it was recently discovered. Even though the African Union played this down again, sometimes many people think that when a problem arises, so playing it down or negating the existence of the problem would be the solution. But sometimes this backfires and it brings more questions. Like, there was this story in the news. I'm not sure if it authenticated or not, because the AU denied that after constructing those buildings, the Chinese are the ones who installed the connection, the internet, infrastructure, and everything. Now, during the night, for a period of 5 years, all the discussion, everything was fed back to Beijing for a period of 5 full years.
Really? Wow.
there's this, investigative journalist and whatever break stories. So that was happening. And then it was stated that the Algerian technicians who were doing maintenance and repair came across the thing, and after realizing that, they informed, but some way, somehow, the story leaked to the press, and they tried to mitigate the consequences by limiting knowledge within the AU system, but it spread. It was just like that. Now, if we presume that this is it, for a period of 5 years, wow, how many of your plans and wherever have you exposed them?
Or maybe deals with other donors, I mean, it's secret information.
If we presume this is true, yes. We also have, at a certain point in time, polio and other diseases were a problem to the OAU and the AU now, Ebola and whatever. Some people even say like these vaccines and AU are provided free of charge to Africa and other African AU via AU and via these countries. But some people say, we act as the guinea pig to those big companies, because of their own benefits. Yes, they say we provide you for free, but the way the guinea pigs are used as for experiments of medicine and vaccines. So there is a certain price, knowingly or unknowingly, we pay due to this interference. And the interference, we allow it knowingly, also unknowingly. It is there. Yeah. It exists and it's real.
Interesting. This is a very interesting fact, Edwin, and it also reflects something that I heard of Uschi Eid. She's the head of the German Africa Foundation. And from an interview with her, I remember that the African Union explicitly asked German construction firms to build the headquarters building because they did not want Chinese or either French or American companies to pursue this. So, I mean, there is probably a question of interference from, let's say, African powers like those. I mean, Germany has not a reputation of being extremely active or engaged in many relations. So I can see that there's a certain attitude like don't bite the hand that feeds you. So, I mean, it's a very important issue to keep those interferences in place. Edwin, I would like to thank you for now, and then we will go on to some more controversial questions.
No problem.
But until this point, thank you for this very insightful intellectual conversation we had. Very freestyle, and I learned a lot. And now I guess we should get into some more critical assessment of the African Union past and future.